Good evening. This is Shindo. Before I start reading this article about Saudi Arabia, I want to tell you about a personal experience that I've had involving Saudi Arabia. I asked someone many years ago, someone who at the time I didn't trust, but was willing to listen to, where he believed World War III would start. Well, he told me years ago that he believed, well, he doesn't say things just like I believe. He says it sort of the way I do, which is a statement of fact as far as saying anything with regards to prognosticating in the future. I generally, if you hear me say I think, well, I would take that with a grain of salt. I didn't say I think that Donald Trump would be president. I said he would be president, and he is. So just for an example, he is like me. When I asked him where would World War III start, he said Saudi Arabia. Well, I didn't believe it at the time, but I have grown to be more open-minded to listening to his opinion, and I have grown to have great confidence in what he says to me. And all of us are looking towards Iran. We're looking towards, of course, North Korea, now Syria, as the hot spots, as the places that will start World War III. But this has been, at least 5 years ago that I was told Saudi Arabia by him. And I find it interesting when these stories come up about Saudi Arabia. Now remember, folks, you need to remember something very important is in Saudi Arabia, a lot more important than the oil, and that is Mecca. Mecca is in Saudi Arabia. So if you wonder why it is that the United States of America doesn't call out Saudi Arabia for the 9/11 terrorist and call out Saudi Arabia for this, that, and the other, oil is a big part of that, of course, since our American dollar is petroleum based. But it's not just that. It is, of course, Saudi Arabia, Mecca. And, well, it makes sense, doesn't it, that World War III would be started in the place that is the most holy place for the Muslims in the world. Now, I heard a YouTube video, a person that I am subscribed to yesterday discussing this issue, and it was coincidental, I suppose, that I had been discussing what I had been told years ago by this person about Saudi Arabia starting World War III. I was discussing that yesterday, and then I saw this video last night, decided to look it up myself. This is an article from The Globalist. Now, folks, I don't know a lot of these different websites that I might read from. I don't know them all. I don't know this one. So if this is somehow some kind of New World Order type organization, I don't know. I have no idea. I will put a link in the description box to this article. Just remember, folks, you have to be critical thinkers. And if you read something that may be from someone who has a different perspective than you, then you just simply use your critical thinking skills and you ferret out what is true and what is probably exaggerated. I read this article and I think it's a very good one to put in perspective what is going on in Saudi Arabia, because right now the US and China they're ratcheting up. Really, they're making the Middle East an even more tense area, a real powder keg. I mean, it just needs a spark, and it makes perfect sense that Saudi Arabia would be the catalyst to World War III. I firmly believe that this friend of mine is correct. This is from The Globalist. If you like what I do, please subscribe to my channel, comment, click like, share these videos. The Globalist. Trump and China risking a Middle East arm race. Of course, you will find this link in the description box. The United States and China both cozying up to Saudi Arabia and irritating Iran could mean global trouble. U.S. President Donald Trump is not pleased. In his fiery election campaign pronouncement, Mr. Trump had described the nuclear agreement as, quote, one of the worst deals I've ever seen, unquote, and vowed to, quote, dismantle it. The agreement was concluded 2 years ago with the world's major powers. Limits to U.S. power. To his chagrin, Mr. Trump has found himself forced to acknowledge that Iran is complying with the nuclear deal. His strategy stems from the realization that the United States would render itself impotent if it were to unilaterally terminate the agreement with Iran. The United States' European allies, as well as Russia and China, would condemn termination, uphold their end of the agreement, and refuse to adhere by punitive measures the United States might adopt. In other words, termination would significantly reduce the U.S. ability to influence Iran. Even so, sticking to his desire to remain unpredictable, Mr. Trump has not ruled out terminating the agreement. Asked point blank by the Associated Press whether he would stick to the deal, Mr. Trump replied, quote, it's possible that we won't, unquote. Strange bedfellows. Ironically, the staunchest opponents of the nuclear agreement with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel have since its conclusion urged the Trump administration not to scrap the deal. No question, both countries remain critical of the agreement. However, they believe that the nuclear deal has brought them a decade of an Islamic republic deprived of a nuclear weapon capability. From their vantage point, the rise of Mr. Trump and his tougher policy towards Iran supports them in their approach, playing with fire. A frustrated Trump doesn't just sit back, however. That is why he appears to be actively groping for ways to provoke Iran to back out of the deal. His policy towards Iran risks sparking an arms race as the unintended consequence of his policy, not as a planned outcome. In that regard, the outcome of May 12th elections in Iran could play into Mr. Trump's hands if a hardliner, rather than an incumbent President Hassan Rouhani, were to emerge victorious. Enter China. But Trump isn't the only one ready to play with fire. and are the Chinese. They have agreed to build a drone manufacturing plant in Saudi Arabia. This step alone could initiate a similar drone race that threatens to take hostilities in the region to a whole new, more dangerous level. With the United States refusing to share its most advanced drone technology, China has agreed to open its first overseas defense production facility in Saudi Arabia. State-owned China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, CASC, will manufacture its CH-4 Kayong or Rainbow drone as well as associated equipment in Saudi Arabia. The CH-4 is comparable to the U.S. armed MQ-9 Reaper drone. The deal could spark an arms race in the Middle East, with Iran and other states seeking to match the kingdom's newly acquired capability to launch strikes from the comfort of computerized Saudi Arabia Command and Control Center without putting Saudi military personnel at risk. Reckless China. As if the drone project weren't explosive enough, China also signed an agreement on nuclear cooperation with Saudi Arabia during last month's visit by Saudi King Salman. The agreement is for a feasibility study of a construction of high-temperature gas-cooled HTGR nuclear power plants in the kingdom, as well as cooperation in intellectual property and the development of domestic industrial supply chain for HTGRs built in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Strategy. The agreement contributes to Saudi Arabia's efforts to develop nuclear energy and potentially a nuclear weapons capability. Saudi officials have repeatedly insisted that the kingdom is developing nuclear capabilities for peaceful purposes such as medicine, electricity generation, and desalination of seawater. They said Saudi Arabia is committed to putting its future facilities under supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. A recent report by the Washington-based Institute for Science and International Security, ISIS, concluded the nuclear agreement with Iran has not eliminated the kingdom's desire for nuclear weapons capabilities and even nuclear weapons. There is little reason to doubt that Saudi Arabia will be more actively seek nuclear weapon capabilities motivated by its concerns about the ending of the JCPOA's major nuclear limitations starting over year 10 of the deal or sooner if the deal fails. Put in plain English, Saudi Arabia is putting into place the legal building blocks for its own nuclear capability for if and when Iran is freed from the shackles of nuclear agreement. For now, that is a decade from now. An earlier cancellation would move that point up, not necessarily by design. China as a regional balancer. China, unlike the United States, has to balance its relations with both Saudi Arabia and Iran, which has had a longer military relationship. To do so, China has moved cautiously to restore nuclear cooperation with Iran in the wake of the lifting of the UN sanctions. Iran's government-controlled Iranian Students News Agency reported this week that China has agreed to redesign Iran's Arak nuclear reactor under U.S. supervision. Given China's emergency dual allegiances in the region, whatever Mr. Trump does vis-a-vis Iran matters a great deal. His high-stakes poker game will likely embolden Saudi Arabia in what the kingdom is ruling Al Saud family considers its existential battle with Iran. That, coupled with Chinese nuclear energy and military deals with Saudi Arabia and Iran, creates an explosive mix that threatens to spark a regional arms race with potentially dangerous consequences. It is important to note, however, that the Chinese dealing with Iran and Saudi Arabia in the nuclear domain fall within the NPT guidelines. they are not in and of themselves designed for weaponization. Still, one has to put them in the context of unspoken ambitions and maneuvering for the future. China and the United States are pursuing different objectives in the Middle East as its dominant Saudi-Iranian dispute. In doing so, the two world powers risk further destabilizing the region rather than contributing to ending debilitating disputes, reducing volatility, and putting an end to a large-scale bloodshed. As a result, despite their different goals, both powers' approach threaten to reinforce one another in putting the Middle East at greater risk. Now, when it comes to a nuclear power in the Middle East, who do you think's going to be next? It's either going to be Iran or it's going to be Saudi Arabia. And who do you think the United States is going to be behind in that particular decision? I mean, who do you think the United States would back? Sure ain't going to be backing Iran, are they? Especially not with this current president. And you know, I did a video about Saudi Arabia and the possibility of Trump. You know, Trump said a lot of things running for president, so does any candidate. One of the things he said is, you know, starting basically some kind of trade war with Saudi Arabia, among others, over oil, you know. We are always, the United States of America is always going to be beholden to Saudi Arabia. It is just a fact, folks, because if we are ever in a contentious relationship with Saudi Arabia could simply stop buying or selling their oil and only accepting American dollars. And that would destroy the American economy. It would destroy it. And it's only a matter of time, of course. That's what I did in my last video. It's only a matter of time before the American economy is destroyed. This is just another of those puzzle pieces that are coming in together that are leading us to this end result. And the more I see something like this with Saudi Arabia looking to become a nuclear power, and it's going to come down to America having to choose between letting Iran become one or Saudi Arabia. And which one do you think they're going to choose? And once the United States falls behind Saudi Arabia in this, who do you think Iran's going to go to for support? Russia. These are all the players who are falling in together. Yes, it is a little ways off, and when I say a little ways, I mean a few years. Okay, that's not that many. It's not that many years from now. I firmly believe. Now, when I say something that I believe, it's not necessarily going to happen, but I firmly believe that we are going to see this war to end all wars, this World War III, within the next, 6 or 7 years. Before a Trump administration, before his second term would be up. I'm certain of it. I think saying 6 or 7 years from now is actually being rather conservative. I think it may even be before that. And all these things that are relevant to you and me, all these things that are relevant to foreign relations with the United States, is sort of falling between the cracks, unfortunately. And a lot of the people who I get news from here on YouTube, they're going to probably have to close their YouTube channels down, because these are people who aren't just sitting behind a microphone like I do and just, slapping up a picture. They actually have some kind of production value in what they do. So they're not going to be able to put out these videos, not with YouTube dying the way it is. So I'm not going to see them. So when I don't see them, I'm not going to be able to put it in my own words and talk about it from my perspective to you. And I see this YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, not shutting down, but I'm not seeing me doing a whole heck of a lot in the near future, because I think I've done as much as I can to bring people to this understanding, an understanding that I've had now for going on 6 years. 6 years in May 15th, 2011, when I woke up. There's a story. I'll tell you this story in conclusion here. It is the story of the Buddha. Now, I won't go into everything that brought him to this point, but eventually he decided to sit down under the Bodhi tree, and he decided that he wouldn't get up out of meditation until he understood what causes suffering in the world. So it took him a couple of days sitting under that tree. He came to that realization of what causes suffering in the world. And when he did, he was walking. He was a new man. He was the Buddha. He was no longer Siddhartha. He was Buddha. And he was walking in a village, early morning hours, and an old man saw him. And he saw this glow about the Buddha. And he said, "Are you a god?" And the Buddha said, "No." And the man said, "Are you a man?" And the Buddha said, "I am awake." And that's what Buddha means, the awakened one. It's not a god. It's not really a man either. He is awake. 6 years ago, in May, I awoke to a realization and an understanding of who I am. And I try so hard to do this, to get people to wake up to the reality of the situation we're in. This is the end of the age. Now, I know this. I have no question in my mind. It's just a matter of how it's going to happen. Not whether it's going to happen, just how. It's a matter of how. And I have been trying to use this channel, starting with nothing, with no subscribers, and now I'm over 1,000, after 5 years. Trying to get people to wake up to this reality that I have woken up to. And it's not because I want people to be afraid. It's not because I want people to somehow give me some kind of credit even for any of this. I'm not looking for the fame and fortune that so many people seem to be looking for these days. I simply want people to try themselves to wake up. You need, those of you who who have these Christian constructs and think in your mind, I can't possibly be right because I'm not a Christian. Or those of you who still have the Christian constructs but call yourself an atheist and say, I can't possibly be right because I'm referring to the end of an age and that's too Christian. You're both very foolish, and you're not open-minded enough to realize that the things that are happening now in this world have nothing to do with Christianity. They have nothing to do with the Bible. They have everything to do with the players out there who want to make sure to bring about what it is they truly desire, and that is your destruction. But the thing is, they're going to destroy themselves in the process. And over the last 6 years, I've realized that the vast majority of the people that I've come across that are trolls on YouTube, they act as though they too desire destruction. They want it. They desire it. And, it's going to be given to you. It's going to be given to you. But those of you who do not desire to be destroyed, you need to wake up to this reality. You need to prepare yourself. And that does not mean that you start storing food. That doesn't mean that you start storing up gold or silver. What you store up is good relations with the people around you. What you store up is confidence in yourself that you can make it through this. Because it's going to get desperate. It's going to get real. And it's going to get very, very painful for a lot of us very, very soon. And the sooner you wake up to that reality, the better you're going to be. This is not my opinion of things, folks. This is the reality that we're living in. This is Shindo. Have a good Thursday.